Hi folks, welcome to Tuesday's meeting of broadcast of the iWrite Radio podcast stroke videocast. I've got Jimmy Hutton with me.
Boy.
Stewart Lockhead.
Hello there.
And we've got Phil back. The Charlie down in the corner has nothing to do with him. He just can't work his laptop. So we've got Phil Attridge and I'm Norrie Stewart.
I'm a bit worried about the Charlie in any corner, mate.
There's no porcelain in that corner, is there?
Mm.
We're going to open up with a report from Jimmy Stroke Stewart about the AUOB Zoom meeting last night. And then we're going to have a wee chat about various blogs and articles that have popped up in the last 24 hours. And one that's a bit older than that might come into it. So Jimmy, give us your thoughts on the meeting.
Yeah, it was you know my thoughts on AUOB, mate. I think they're very useful for certain things and bloody disastrous at others. But the meeting last night was basically a sort of question and answer session of Angus, Brendan MacNeil and Chris McEleny. And the questions were interesting, mate. It was basically asking a lot of the stuff that we talk about, but never seems to get asked of the SNP as a whole. The first questioner last night was our old friend Peter Bell, and there were some really good ones here. You know, people are asking about direct action, about what we should be doing about this upcoming vote on the Brexit deal. Both Angus and Chris came across very well, I thought. It's weird, Angus MacNeil is always sort of cast by the party and by the friendly press, if there is such a thing, as some kind of lone maverick who has these weird ideas. I very much resent that because the guy seems to be coming from a similar kind of place to quite a lot of the Yes movement. He doesn't believe the Section 30 path is worthwhile going down. He made that quite clear last night, that he thinks next year's election should be turned into a plebiscite, so that when we get over 50%, we are then saying, look, we now want independence. How is the way to go about achieving that? Now, I don't think that's going to happen because, frankly, the manifesto for next year's election will be written by Nicola and that small coterie around her who decide everything about the SNP lately. And that manifesto is in no way going to reflect the desire, I'm afraid, of the Scottish people for independence. It's going to have some wishy-washy line, probably bust around a focus group with like people like Pete Wishart and odds like that.
Stuart, well, let's Stuart jump in because you came away with a slightly different impression of.
We're not going to
Angus
have a decent Brahmi, but yeah, towards the very end, one of the questions was about direct action. The suggestion was made that they should walk out of Westminster. One or two added suggestions on how to walk out. I just got the impression when Angus, Brendan MacNeil answered that question, he said he was stressing, oh, well, I've still got work to do, you know, the constituents and all that. And I just got the feeling, given that he's already been a chair of or convener of a committee at Westminster, that he had his feet a bit too firmly under the table there. But that aside, I can't disagree with what Jimmy said. I was impressed with Chris McEleny.
Yeah. He's quite an expert on the constitution of the SNP, and he pointed out to people that should they wish to influence next year's manifesto, the person to email is Keith Brown, because as deputy leader, he has responsibility for putting together the manifesto. So I'd imagine that Keith Brown's emails went through the roof over the last 10, 12 hours since that meeting finished.
Yeah,
So-
and the important thing is if you're going to email Keith Brown, you tell them you're not a constituent, but you were interested in the manifesto. Otherwise, you'll just get pushed down the line to whoever handles these constituency stuff.
Right. So was there anything that came out that looked like a plan B? I mean, did anybody actually say, right,
Plebiscite.
we're going to do X, Y, Z?
Yeah, the plebiscite seems to be where.
Yeah, there's
focusing.
also the thing, Norrie, that both of those gentlemen pointed out that, well, actually, Angus MacNeil mentioned something I hadn't heard before. He personally had asked somebody, as he put it, very high up in the hierarchy of the SNP in late 2018, why have you not asked for a Section 30 yet? And the reply that he got was, well, they're going to say no, so why ask? That's why they're so against doing the same thing again and getting the same answer. Because Nicola, as he pointed out, Nicola and those around her don't have a secret plan like they're telling us they do. If they'd had a secret plan, it would have been deployed when Theresa May said now is not the time, or the twice that Boris has said no. There is no secret plan about this.
I don't think they've ever suggested they had a secret plan. In fact, I think the opposite is true. I think the presumption of that came from the way that Salmond played politics. Salmond always seemed to have something up his sleeve. I always remember them screaming to see the legal advice on something. And it went on for 18 months. Totally sidelined the opposition. They got so far up their own arses over it. And then he said, right, okay, there you are. And it was nothing. Yeah. But because he'd been refusing to issue it for 18 months, it gathered momentum and became more and more appointing and totally distracted the opposition.
But this is where
it turned out to be nothing.
But this is where Feast for Indies come from, and lately Feast for Nicky. We've got it in hand. Give us another mandate. We have a plan. Well, do you? Because all that's going to happen, frankly, I didn't even think they'll last next year. I think they'll win the election in May, probably with over 50% of the vote in the constituency bit. And I don't think they'll even ask. We'll get COVID driving us down for a bit. We'll then get to the summer recess. Well, then something else will come up. And they'll ask in 2022, and Boris or whoever Boris's successor is, will say no. And then we've got to wait till what? The 2024 election to have another go. We have an election next year where the SNP should, if they campaign correctly, win massively with over 50% of the vote. That is our time. That is the one thing that we can say to the international community. Look, the Party of Independence has over half of the votes cast in Scotland. And we're going to toss that away because Nicola and those around her, they're asking us to vote for the status quo. They're the centrists. They are the status quo. They want another 5 years of sitting doing nothing, but asking the English government, please, can we be a nation? If that happens, the movement splits asunder, and that's exactly what the English want.
Phil.
Can I make a point there?
Yeah.
Well, it's the Scottish government. I mean, what they're facing at Westminster, and you've got another 4 years, quite possibly another 5 years to one of the most lunatic governments we've ever had. There's no way you can get a plan together when you're faced with something like that. In May, if they have an overriding win, that's another, what you mentioned about international, that's another weapon. They need to build an armory up. And there's absolutely no point going hell for it, just when you know you're going to get knocked back. It's just pointless. That's called suicide.
Well, not quite sure where you're coming from with that, Phil. Yes, it's a pointless going. Do you expect the government, Scottish government, to continue waiting? You say, armory, you're looking for more mandates.
Case at the moment, just going for a Section 30 and no, well, that's the end of it. You got.
I agree with you there, but what about the idea of turning next May's hollywood elections into, if there's only one key manifesto goal on the SNP's manifesto, independence?
I think most people, if they're interested in independence, it's a no-brainer that overwhelming majority of people are going to look at next May as a form of referendum on the Scottish government. Absolutely no way they're not going to look at it like that.
I was just saying, but you're saying that as for the international community, that would be an international weapon, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, if you were going to go to the international, all these various courts that England doesn't want to recognise them, there's plenty different communities. Of course, we'll get sympathy. We've already had sympathy from European leaders and statesmen. That there's absolutely, you know, no barrier to Scotland getting back into Europe. There's been articles now. I mean, if you're looking at Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, that's a nice. I mentioned that yesterday. Yeah, Northwestern Europe's Benelux countries. You know,
I
I
don't know why can't we just call? I mean, I'm presuming what you're talking about, Jimmy, is declaring independence if the SNP win the Holyrood elections with a landslide.
No, you win the Holyrood elections with a landslide, having put an explicit commitment into the manifesto that that election, should we win it with over 50% of the vote, would give us the right to start negotiating with England as to our withdrawal from the union, because
So
we no
it's
longer
not-
wish to be a part of a union where our assets are being stripped because
So,
the nation of Scotland
well-
feels it is being stripped.
So what you're asking for is a mandate to start negotiating for independence, not a mandate to hold a referendum.
Yeah, we can chuck a referendum into the mix, mate. I don't want a referendum given to us by England. I want us to negotiate for independence, and then we'll let the people of Scotland decide. You know what? Do we want this independence, or do we want to remain part of the union?
So to put it in Brexit terms, you want a deal negotiated and a referendum on the deal.
That's generally the way it's done.
I think that'd probably be the best way. Yes.
That's mad.
Well, that is the way it's usually done.
But
Right,
that,
to let England absolutely bomb the negotiations, that's fine, mate. Because if they want to do that, we'll get 90% of people who will vote yes in the confirmatory thing.
you can't agree to that until you've seen the deal. In a
What deal?
practical sense. Well, if you're going to go and negotiate and then hold a referendum on the results of the negotiation, what would you do if you were England? You give them nothing.
Well, exactly. But if they give us nothing, that's fine. You get 90% of people voting to go away to walk. We're away, mate. As far as I'm concerned, once the negotiations start, we're away. It's just a matter of time. If they want to mess up the negotiations and be as shitty as possible during the negotiations, it wouldn't matter. The international community will look at that and go, oh, look, there's England trying to bend Scotland over and give it them up the garry because they do not want to lose Scotland's assets. And we'll just walk away with our assets.
I'm not sure about that, Jimmy. I think the international community will see England as a plum to be picked. I think America will not support a breakaway.
What does England have to be picked?
Well,
England's carrying me. England's about to be picked over by the rest of the world because they've just hung themselves out to dry. The unfortunate thing is they're hanging us out to dry at the same time.
That's my point. They're going to want what Scotland's got as part of Greater England.
I don't see that, Norrie. Don't forget, there is definitely movement abroad, especially in Europe. From the 1st of January onwards, we can expect nice sounds coming from European leaders once they don't have to take account of anything what England says. No, England's no longer, well, Britain's no longer in the EU. It's all over and done with by this weekend. In fact, what's me talking about next January?
I'm not sure I agree with you on that one. I think any focus on the UK will be on Northern Ireland, not Scotland.
Why?
Because of its link to ERA.
Northern Ireland's just been handed everything that it wants. It's
Yeah.
part of the EU and part of the UK. The politicians the politicians in Ireland might have a struggle coming to terms with it, but the politicians in Europe have got exactly what they wanted over Ireland, and effectively they're looking at Ireland now, going, "What do you think? 15 years or 30 before it's a united Ireland?"
And that's where they'll concentrate.
Well,
I think you've got to throw into what Phil just said. It's sort of Benelux of the two parts of Ireland and Scotland in a loose federation of some sort, and you've got that satisfies an awful lot of people in Northern Ireland on both sides of the community.
Joint to Scotland, which is where they originally come from anyway.
Well, I mean, you look at look at the situation with the Netherlands and Belgium. I mean, that's why those two countries exist with the borders they've got.
Stuart, it's an interesting prospect, mate. The Benelux countries, but Ireland's biggest problem will be sorting the sectarian divide in the north. That's been something that, when you look at the Good Friday Agreement, that was put on the back burner because they managed to bring relative economic prosperity to the north and the south at the same time. Belfast still has 20 miles of 30-foot high walls dividing communities. That's not going to be sorted overnight.
Well, I'll tell you, let's move on, guys. Unless somebody did manage to come up with a plan that I haven't heard.
Email Keith Brown. Let's be honest.
So the consensus was what?
Norrie's consensus is we're going to sit and do exactly the same for the next 5 years under Nicola Sturgeon as we've done for the last 6. That is nothing. Achieved nothing about moving Scotland closer to independence. And everybody's idea, plan B, basically, is hope that Nicola steps aside at some point, because none of them have got the balls to remove her.
I agree with Jimmy to a certain extent, and I think a lot of it's Holyrood, because it's not just the SNP. You see it like people sit there and they get comfortable. This is good. Oh, we don't want them to upset the apple cart. They're quite happy to stay there for years. And to be quite honest, particularly on Labour side, but some of the hillbillies in the SNP really need cleared out as well. You know, they're too long. Just there too long, and they get comfy.
It'll be something untoward that actually brings us closer to independence. It'll be some action or inaction by the government in London where they completely mess up or they overstep the mark and try and take away something from Holyrood that they think is meaningless and actually means something to Scotland. And it's going to be the people that stand up. It's going to be marches. It's going to be 100,000 people marching on Princess Street shouting obscenities at London. That's what's going to be needed to happen, because frankly, we don't have enough radicals in Scotland right now, and certainly not in the SNP. The SNP, as I say, they're the status quo now, they're centrist.
Yeah, well, I object to going on some of these marches and then there's loads of banners. It's a march, anybody can turn up, and some people turn up, usually from the socialist end, with a big banner that says Tory scum. Oh. And then they get shot on from them high. I'm sorry. That needs to. I mean, why?
Tories are scum, and we should point that out at every opportunity. Tories are trash. They've been in power in this country for 90 of the last 120 years, and there are more people in poverty now than there were 100 years ago.
I've just realised why I'm the only sensible one here. Because you're all covered in red. And by the way, I want a law passed that there are ramps for disabled wheelchairs built on every barricade.
All right. Well, anyway, you can still go on a march because you'll be at the front of the march in the future. Don't forget.
As long as the battery's been charged.
Right behind the Tory scum banner.
I don't think that'll be at the front, not even though they have an AUOB.
No, I can see why people object to it. If Tories are going to vote for independence, and some of them will, why alienate them?
Yeah, but you've got the perfect answer, haven't you, Norrie?
What's that?
No. You ever been on
the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party?
Yeah.
One of the best chants I've heard on a march. Might be inappropriate, but it's Maggie, Maggie, Maggie. Dee, dee, dee. It's definitely Maggie, Maggie, Maggie. Out, out, out.
Welcome back, Phil.
Sorry.
Well, talking about the comfort of SNPs, MSPs and MPs, there's been a wee spat involving Pete Wishart that Wings has covered today. apparently, now I haven't got the guy's name. Stewart, you're our...
Dr. Timothy Rideout, and he's convener of an independent pressure group called the Scottish Currency Group, and he was elected at the NEC elections only a month ago to the party's Policy Development Committee. In fact, I believe he could be elected as convener.
Well, he apparently sent out, as from that position, an email to all the MSPs and MPs, and got a reply from Pete Wishart, which was less than complimentary.
Well, yeah, let's be honest. This is a meeting admittedly organised by not AUOB, but the group called Yes Alba, that has come out of a convention of AUOB people, and there's some fairly heavy duty people involved in that, and they've organised a national assembly. It'll be online at the end of January, which is about 4 weeks away, and Timothy Rideout invited SNP politicians to take part, to contribute. I'm waiting to see who has said yes.
I thought the National Assembly was organised by the SNP. I thought it's an SNP National Assembly that's coming up in January.
No, I think there's
there is one. It may be a different one. But Mr. Wishart was not.
No, his reply was snide, sleek it, arrogant, busily telling Dr. Rideout, and he actually purposefully addressed him as Mr. Rideout rather than Doctor, just because that's the type of small-minded, petty little thing that Pete Wishart always does. But he basically told him that he had been representing his constituents in the party for the last 2 decades and knew how to do it and would not take instruction from someone like Mr. Rideout. I'm not surprised at that. I don't think anybody who's seen Pete Wishart's idiot behaviour on social media over the last couple of years would be surprised at that.
Looks as though
what I am surprised at is how disrespectful he chooses to be to someone who was elected less than a month ago by a massive amount by the people at the NEC.
Yeah, I've got the reason for the letter wrong. Sorry, it's about the vote in the Commons, the Brexit vote that we're all not talking about for some reason or other today.
Yeah, he was suggesting that they don't turn up.
Yeah, that was my position and Jimmy's position yesterday. Isn't that right, Jimmy?
That's my position. You boycott it, just don't turn up. Don't abstain, just don't turn up. Don't
Jesus, am I the only intelligent person in this Zoom room?
No, nobody's going to have to turn up. It's going to be all done by bloody thingy, but don't bother voting. Just have nothing to do with it. Brexit, as I said yesterday, it's an English project. Let them vote on it.
Well, you could always click on Zoom and leave a nice message. We'll leave it to the individuals to have the message.
I would fear walking out on Zoom. The number of things that could go wrong with that. You've got to be able to do it, organize it with dignity.
Which automatically means that politicians can't do it.
Has somebody not already done just exactly that? Does somebody not walk out of a committee or something and
I think I agree with you, Norrie, on that. I don't think it's possible to organise a virtual walkout because you've got officials handling the techie side, and they'll be focused entirely on decorum.
Mind you, give you a poser. If they did it, what would be the Daily Express headline next day?
Well, the problem is that, and for me, it would have to be in the House of Commons, and either a question of refusing to vote and walking out, but just not attending doesn't carry it. It needs to have major impact.
Well, it's not going to have major impact because it's a bloody Zoom meeting. You can't have that impact. I mean, let's be honest. When the SNP stood up and walked out 2 years ago, that had impact. We're not going to be able to do that for at least the next year or so because of the pandemic. You're not going to have a fully operating house.
Which is why I think it's a waste of time doing it now. And I don't see a benefit to it without the theatrics of it.
Well, I'm sorry, you're posing it the wrong way around, Norrie. I don't see the point of voting on it.
Well, that's arguable, but for me, I think they they have to vote against it. Lots of people think they should abstain.
I didn't think they have to vote against it. I think Dr. Rideout's main point in that letter is one that Pete Wishart chose not to even address, and it's one that people aren't talking about. If this was a close vote, there's no danger the SNP would be voting against it, because at that point they would be pushing us down a path of no deal. So it's nothing to do with principle, and it's all to do with pretending that somehow they are voting against Brexit when they're not. They're not voting against Brexit. We're already bloody out.
The circumstances allow it to be argued that it's principle. I mean, the circumstances of any vote dictate your reaction to it.
Norrie, if Nicola Sturgeon needs to argue that her vote is principled and convince the Scottish media that it's principled, then clearly it's not, if you're having to argue it.
Oh, come away, Jimmy. Convince the Scottish press.
You never heard
the Scottish press would accuse Nicola Sturgeon of kidnap if she picked a lassie out of a puddle.
It's a meaningless vote. It's a meaningless gesture. And frankly, I'm sick and tired of meaningless gestures by people like Nicola Sturgeon. She's First Minister of Scotland. Go and do something that actually means something to the people of Scotland, rather than fannying about in the English Parliament.
And get what out of it? Do you not think it has to have a benefit?
No, but there's a legacy.
No.
There's a danger of the legacy of them people are opponents of pointing at the SNP saying, well, you voted for it or you voted against it. There's a danger in both of those votes. You're better just not to vote.
Yeah, there is an accusation that will be levelled by the unionist press, whether they vote, abstain, whether they vote for or against or abstain.
But why not just be Scottish about it?
There's a stick to beat them with there, whichever way they go.
Well, why not just be Scottish about it and tell them, no, Brexit, as I say, Brexit's an English project. Let the English vote on it.
Somebody has to go in and stand up and say that.
Well, they can do that. But they didn't have to vote against it.
Yeah, they can vote. They can, you know, there'll certainly be a motion, and there'll be people for and against, and so they can say exactly, make
and
that
frankly,
point, as Jimmy said,
bringing MSPs back to Holyrood to have a whinge and a whine about it when this international treaty is nothing to do with Holyrood, I think it's a waste of time. If they're bringing people back to Holyrood, they should be bringing people back to Holyrood to work out what our ongoing actions are going to be, given that this new variant of COVID is exploding in England and their National Health Service down there is about to collapse. That's what we should be discussing at Holyrood tomorrow, not Boris's deal. The deal's done.
Dumfries and Galloway, they've gone from 1 to 4.
Yeah.
It's the new variant that's whacking them. It's the new variant.
Are we surprised, mate? There's a hell of a lot of people
Everybody's
come across the
gone
border
to
into
4.
Dumfries and Galloway.
Everybody's at 4 now.
Yeah, but there's been a massive increase, Norrie, in Dumfries and Galloway's numbers, and it's basically come about because, frankly, fannies like George Galloway decided that they were crossing the border deliberately to antagonise Nicola Sturgeon because she told them not to. And there's been a lot of people travelled across the border over Christmas.
Right, Stewart.
Yes. You wanted to cover I'm trying to write notes for the blurb. The Times. There was we can all roast this idiot on the Times. There's written an article on the Times. This is the guy that runs Conservative Home, apparently, normally. Not a blog that I read, but I'm sure that
Paul Goodman.
Yes, I'm sure there's a lot of yes, a lot of Tories, even in Scotland, that will be read whatever he says. Let me just say one quote here. What's his headline? Let's go with his headline. We will enjoy this, guys. Times. Johnson's next challenge is saving the union. With Brexit in the bag, the Prime Minister may be hoping a second Scottish referendum does not happen on his watch. All right. Well, he says some really stupid things at the start. Unionists complain of their voice not being heard in Scotland in what amounts to a one-party state with a compliant media.
How can anybody think that a minority government is a one-party state? And if it is, by their definition, is Boris Johnson a dictator with an 80-seat majority?
Exactly. No, it's interesting. It's a line they've peddled quite a few times over the years, and they never tire of regurgitating it, regardless of the fact that it gets laughed at every single time. As you say, it's a minority government, a compliant media. You can't find bloody any part of the Scottish media that's compliant towards the government. Not a part of it. Even the supposedly SNP supporting National will rip the party apart at times.
That's what papers are meant to do. That's what newspapers are meant to do if they wish to be called journalists and that. And there's very few of them on that way take a line. But the line that we're getting here, where they just attack, and like I said, the one party state, that's the line that they always use. Used all over South America. You get a progressive government going in what you think is the right direction, the right wing will attack it. It's a one party state.
Actually, the one party state, I think, was a Labour Party trope. Was it not the Labour Party that came up with that? I think it was.
Yeah, it's the Tory media that have pushed it for the last 10 years now.
Scotland was a Labour Party, well, one party state with Labour, wasn't it, for years? But then I suppose, but they forgot who they were.
But it was a one-party democratic state. Under the SNP, the whole voting and rights to voting and everything's changed, obviously.
Oh, you're all undemocratic now. Is that what it is? You know?
If you vote SNP, you're not a Democrat.
Absolutely.
In Glasgow City Council, they had to paint the bottoms of their shoes the colours of their respective parties, because you could never see their faces. All you could see was their feet coming out of trough, you know.
Nicely put, son. It'll be interesting to see next year's election if the SNP actually get over 50% of the vote, how one party state that's going to appear to the English press. I mean, seriously, every single government throughout Europe would love to have the levels of support that the SNP have in this country. As I say, I'm not a party member and I'm not a great fan of what they're doing at the moment, but come on, they have the people behind them, and they have the people behind them for one reason. They're a country mile ahead of their opponents. You put up Douglas Ross, Ruth Davidson and Richard Leonard in an election against anybody from that SNP front bench, and they're going to get their asses kicked all over Holyrood Park.
I find it quite interesting that piece in the New Statesman today, slagging Richard Leonard for being a Corbynite, really, saying that Scottish Labour's problems are because they've got a Corbynite leader in Richard Leonard. And I'm sitting here and I'm sitting thinking, does this guy ever go to Scotland?
Aye, that's the problem. It's just another one of that long line of articles of people who do not understand Scots at all.
But Chris Deering is a Scot that lives in Scotland, is he not?
He's a Scot that lives in Scotland, but he's absolutely a unionist. And that unionist completely colours his view. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's where Labour in particular went so far wrong. The Scottish people have decided, they may not have voted for it yet, but the Scottish people have decided that this union is a brake upon our ambition. It's a handbrake being held on by England upon Scotland's desire to be an open, embracing nation. They've come to that decision, and at some point that decision will be enacted through a ballot of some description, and we will become an independent country. The majority, I mean, seriously, do they look at 18 polls in a row and think, oh, it's a blip? The direction of travel, the direction of travel has always been towards independence from when we were at bloody 20% in the polls. Nothing has changed that direction of travel, and these people still don't accept it.
Stewart.
This fella here, Goodman. What's his first name? Peter or Paul or Mary? Paul. Sorry, couldn't resist that one. He goes through a very tortuous argument to come up with a. He sums up that Johnson and Sturgeon are two different politicians, different as they could be, but in a roundabout way, they both want the same thing. Mañana, as the Spanish put it. Both fear a second referendum for the same reason, because each of them might lose it and would prefer to put it off.
again, that's he's come to that conclusion before he's written the piece, and he's come to that conclusion before without looking at the facts. If that's his conclusion, let Boris offer Nicola Sturgeon a referendum tomorrow, because I bet you 100 million quid that I haven't got that she wouldn't say no.
I mean, it's an easy conclusion to come to as far as Boris Johnson is concerned, because why would you want another referendum? If there was any possibility you could lose it? And that, I mean, its whole argument is based around delay, 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 delay. And that's the opposition now to independence. It's not a reasoned argument. It's not even better together. It's delay, delay, and hope the SNP implodes.
That's it. They're crossing their fingers and hoping something goes desperately badly wrong. And frankly, it's not been a good year for the SNP. It's not been a good year for Scotland. But in the throes of COVID, and with everything that has happened around the Alex Salmond case, the SNP would still win a bloody referendum, because the Scottish people are sick and tired of being ruled by politicians who have no connection to them and no regard for the desires of the Scottish people.
Phil's waving at me.
Yeah, just thinking, I mean, 6 years ago, 45%. You're now at 58. I'd actually feel better if the figures were in the 60s, you know, because that's getting what you would call a constitutional, you know, 2/3.
You away and boy your heat, son.
Oh no, I don't see you have to get
52%, 48% Brexit.
I'd like to see it into the 6s, just to be on the safe side, because see, you had your chance 6 years ago, you know, and kind of bottled it. Yeah.
I knew you were going to
Just
get
to be on
that.
the safe side, you know, for the bring.
Phil, all I'll say to you, mate, is Brexit. By about February next year, I expect that polls will consistently be telling us that yes is at or around 60%.
Oh, I think this time next year we'll be into the 60s. We'll be into the 60s.
So when's next year? Saturday.
The problem is
what he actually said was this time next year.
That's
a year away.
Oh, that's a year
problem
away.
with having
Okay.
60% in the polls is that the polls mean nothing if there's no way in which you can enact that support. And right now, the Scottish Parliament is doing nothing about that. I hope against hope. I didn't believe Nicola will do it. I genuinely don't. But I hope against hope she offers us some chance to use our support when it's sitting at 65% this time next year. I hope we're not still sitting going, do you think she'll ask whoever's Prime Minister for a Section 30 in January?
I don't think, there's no way she can't ask for a Section 30.
Yeah, but what happens when she gets knocked back, mate? Because she's done nothing when she got knocked back the last twice.
If you give me a chance, she'll ask for a Section 30 when it comes back. She'll then ask the question, how do we get a democratic vote on this? And then she has to go to court.
Oh,
and that's on the presumption.
I'll be dead before that we get anywhere.
Well, sure. The chances are you won't be, but I will.
Sure, you'll forgive me, mate, but it's not about that. I despair of hearing people saying, I want it in my lifetime. No, for you, it's for your grandbairns, pal.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. I'm being selfish.
I'm getting a bit hacked off that nobody will admit that what they're really talking about is UDI.
Yeah, I think we had many discussions about this over the summer, Norrie, and it's going to get to the point, certainly the leadership in Scotland, the leadership in Holyrood will never ask for UTI, mate. They've not got the Chuckies. But I'm interested in some of the people that Nicola has pushed away from Scotland over the last few years, made candidate to the Westminster Parliament rather than Holyrood. There's some great talent down there, as we know, Joe Cherry, Philippa Whitford. There's a lot of them, and I think there are more radicals. I think deliberately they've been pushed to Westminster because Nicola doesn't want them on her back benches causing her a problem. And frankly, she has the assistance of her husband to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, politically, Jimmy, I don't think that, if that is the case, I don't think it was a stupid move. Better them at Westminster, that level, reasonable government up here, get independence, then bring the radicals back. I don't see that as bad politics.
I do, because we need to be led from here. And I think the strength of the party now sits in London. I don't think there's anybody on Nicola's front. I would frankly, I'd say her front bench, the most impressive person on it other than her is John Swinney, who's yesterday's man, and Jean Freeman, who's just about to retire. So,
well, I don't see them being at Westminster as them being out of the fight.
No,
They can still come back for the fight.
I didn't see them being out of the fight either.
But Holyrood is actually going to be useless in the referendum, in the fight for the referendum. There's nothing they can do. I mean, they're tied up by the rules. So people that can ignore the rules can ignore them from Westminster as easily as they can from Holyrood.
And if you're going to have somebody in Westminster leading the charge legally, glad Joanna Cherry's there.
I think she'll end up in jail.
Yeah, but
sure
the problem we're going to have is we're going to have bloody Angus the Fudd. Angus Robertson's going to be seen as the natural successor to Nicola, and she's going to groom him as such.
Oh, no.
And you'll forgive me, but Angus Robertson is, as far as I'm concerned, he is in the hands of the security and intelligence services of the United Kingdom. I'll say that out loud. I'll tell
Allegedly.
you. I'll tell you why. No, allegedly, but I think he is, because he went and married a honey trap.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. For the sort I can't name because they were wearing a bag over their head.
Well, they've certainly had protection, shall we say. Okay, guys, that's us coming up to time. Anybody got anything that they have to get off their chest or their head will explode?
Not today. Well, I apologise for leading the debate a wee bit astray by bringing in the National Assembly. I apologise for that now. Save me doing it later.
Anybody's man.
I just wish somebody would come up and say, right, here's plan B.
Yeah.
Step by step, boom, boom, boom.
I think the worry is,
specific.
We've heard that many times. We've been told we didn't need a plan B. That if a plan B jumped up and kicked us in the coop, and half of us wouldn't recognise it.
So everybody's still voting SNP on the constituency
At the moment,
It's the only way to go, mate.
You don't have to commit, Phil.
I'll be voting for Katrina because she believes that we should have the democratic right to an independence vote.
No, you won't. No, you won't.
Katrina.
No,
She's
Who's
standing
Katrina?
for Labour in North Edinburgh and Leith.
There's
Katrina
still
what?
a candidate.
Sorry? I've never heard of this person.
She's a Labour Party candidate for Holyrood.
What chances has she got getting in?
I'm not a betting person.
But if you were, you wouldn't chuck a tenner on it.
Okay, guys, let's call it a day at that.
I think we're standing about 14% or something in the polls, Labour in Scotland, depending on where it's.
Yeah, that was the last poll I saw
About
on the
14.
constituency vote.
Wait till that campaigning juggernaut Richard Leonard gets into gear. He'll have them in single fingers by the middle of fucking March.
You're doing better on the list. You're at 60% on the list. Right. Okay. Thanks, Jimmy.
Yep.
Thanks, Charlie, also known as Phil.
Cheerio.
And
I'll
thanks.
change it eventually.
Thanks, Stuart. I'm Norrie. Thanks for listening, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. And Jimmy's a Corbynite as well, as you can tell.
No, I'm on me.
Well, that T-shirt's branded you as a Corbynite now.
Oh, get away. Go away, go away.
Corbyn's in Islington, not Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
Cheers for now, folks. Catch you tomorrow.